Chapter 27, Part 2 of New Grub Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jesse. New Grub Street by George Gissing. Chapter 27, Part 2. Ah, if this had happened in the first year of his marriage! What more blessed man than he would have walked the earth? But it came after irreparable harm. No amount of wealth could undo the ruin caused by poverty. It was natural for him, as soon as he could think with deliberation, to turn towards his only friend. But on calling at the house in Clipstone Street, he found the garret empty, and no one could tell him when its occupant was likely to be back. He left a note and made his way back to Islington. The evening had to be spent at the hospital, but on his return Biffen sat waiting for him. "You called about 12, didn't you?" the visitor inquired. "Half-past." "I was at the police court. Odd thing, but it always happens so, that I should have spoken of Sykes the other night. Last night I came upon a crowd in Oxford Street, and the nucleus of it was no other than Sykes himself, very drunk and disorderly, in the grip of two policemen. Nothing could be done for him. I was useless as bail. He even had to sleep in the cell. But I went this morning to see what would become of him. Such a spectacle when they brought him forward! It was only 5 shillings fine, and to my astonishment he produced the money. I joined him outside. It required a little courage, and had a long talk with him. He's writing a London letter for some provincial daily, and the first payment had thrown him off his balance." Reardon laughed gaily, and made inquiries about the eccentric gentleman. Only when the subject was exhausted did he speak of his own concerns, relating quietly what he had learned from Mrs Yule. Biffen's eyes widened. "So," Reardon cried with exultation, "there is the last burden off my mind. Henceforth I haven't a care. The only thing that still troubled me was my inability to give Amy enough to live upon. Now she is provided for in saecula saeculorum. Isn't this grand news?" "Decidedly. But if she's provided for, so are you." "Biffen, you know me better. Could I accept a farthing of her money? This has made our coming together again for ever impossible, unless dead things can come to life. I know the value of money, but I can't take it from Amy." The other kept silence. "No, but now everything is well. She has her child, and can devote herself to bringing the boy up. And but I shall be rich on my own account. 150 a year. It would be a farce to offer Amy her share of it. By all the gods of Olympus, we will go to Greece together, you and I." "Pooh!" "I swear it. Let me save for a couple of years, and then get a good month's holiday, or more if possible, and, as Pallas Athene liveth, we shall find ourselves at Marseilles, going aboard some boat of the Messageries. I can't believe yet that this is true. Come, we will have a supper to-night. Come out into Upper Street, and let us eat, drink, and be merry." "You are beside yourself. But never mind. Let us rejoice by all means. There's every reason." "That poor girl! Now at last she'll be at ease." "Who?" "Amy, of course. I'm delighted on her account. Ah, but if it had come a long time ago, in the happy days, then she too would have gone to Greece, wouldn't she? Everything in life comes too soon or too late. What it would have meant for her and for me! She would never have hated me then, never. Biffen, am I base or contemptible? She thinks so. That's how poverty has served me. If you had seen her, How she looked at me when we met the other day! You would understand well enough why I couldn't live with her now, not if she entreated me to. That would make me base if you like. Gods, how ashamed I should be if I yielded to such a temptation! And once—" He had worked himself to such intensity of feeling that at length his voice choked and tears burst from his eyes. "Come out and let us have a walk," said Biffen. On leaving the house they found themselves in a thick fog, through which trickled drops of warm rain. Nevertheless they pursued their purpose, and presently were seated in one of the boxes of a small coffee shop. Their only companion in the place was a cab driver who had just finished a meal, and was now nodding into slumber over his plate and cup. Reardon ordered fried ham and eggs, the luxury of the poor, and when the attendant woman was gone away to execute the order, he burst into excited laughter. "Here we sit, two literary men. How should we be regarded by—" He named 2 or 3 of the successful novelists of the day. "With what magnificent scorn they would turn from us and our squalid feast! They have never known struggle, not they. They are public school men, university men, club men, society men. An income of less than 300 or 400 a year is inconceivable to them. That seems the minimum for an educated man's support. It would be small-minded to think of them with rancour, but, by Apollo, I know that we should change places with them if the work we have done were justly weighed against theirs. What does it matter? We are different types of intellectual workers. I think of them savagely now and then, but only when hunger gets a trifle too keen. Their work answers a demand. Ours, or mine at all events, doesn't. They are in touch with the reading multitude. They have the sentiments of the respectable. They write for their class. Well, you had your circle of readers, and if things hadn't gone against you by this time you certainly could have counted on your 300 or 400 a year. It's unlikely that I should ever have got more than £200 for a book, and to have kept at my best I must have been content to publish once every 2 or 3 years. The position was untenable with no private income, and I must needs marry a wife of dainty instincts. What astounding impudence! No wonder fate pitched me aside into the gutter." They ate their ham and eggs and exhilarated themselves with a cup of chicory, called coffee. Then Biffen drew from the pocket of his venerable overcoat the volume of Euripides he had brought, and their talk turned once more to the land of the sun. Only when the coffee shop was closed did they go forth again into the foggy street, and at the top of Pentonville Hill they stood for 10 minutes debating a metrical effect in one of the fragments. Day after day Reardon went about with a fever upon him. By evening his pulse was always rapid, and no extremity of weariness brought him a refreshing sleep. In conversation he seemed either depressed or excited, more often the latter. Save when attending to his duties at the hospital, he made no pretence of employing himself. If at home, he sat for hours without opening a book, and his walks, excepting when they led him to Clipstone Street, were aimless. The hours of postal delivery found him waiting in an anguish of suspense. At 8 o'clock each morning he stood by his window, listening for the postman's knock in the street. As it approached he went out to the head of the stairs, and if the knock sounded at the door of his house, he leaned over the banisters, trembling in expectation. But the latter was never for him. When his agitation had subsided he felt glad of the disappointment, and laughed and sang. One day Carter appeared at the City Road establishment and made an opportunity of speaking to his clerk in private. "I suppose," he said with a smile, "they'll have to look out for someone else at Croydon?" "By no means. The thing is settled. I go at Christmas." "You really mean that?" Undoubtedly. Seeing that Reardon was not disposed even to allude to private circumstances, the secretary said no more, and went away convinced that misfortunes had turned the poor fellow's brain. Wandering in the city about this time, Reardon encountered his friend the realist. "Would you like to meet Sykes?" asked Biffen. "I'm just going to see him." "Where does he live?" "In some indiscoverable hole. To save fuel, he spends his mornings at some reading rooms. The admission is only a penny, and there he can see all the papers and do his writing and enjoy a grateful temperature." They repaired to the haunt in question. A flight of stairs brought them to a small room in which were exposed the daily newspapers. Another ascent, and they were in a room devoted to magazines, chess, and refreshments. Yet another, and they reached the department of weekly publications. Lastly, at the top of the house, they found a lavatory and a chamber for the use of those who desired to write. The walls of this last retreat were of blue plaster and sloped inwards from the floor. Along them stood school desks with benches, and in one place was suspended a ragged and dirty card announcing that paper and envelopes could be purchased downstairs. An enormous basket full of waste paper and a small stove occupied two corners. Ink blotches, satirical designs, and much scribbling in pen and pencil served for mural adornment. From the adjacent lavatory came sounds of splashing and spluttering, and the busy street far below sent up its confused noises. 2 persons only sat at the desks. One was a hunger-bitten, out-of-work clerk, evidently engaged in replying to advertisements. In front of him lay 2 or 3 finished letters, and on the ground at his feet were several crumpled sheets of note-paper representing abortive essays in composition. The other man, also occupied with the pen, looked about 40 years old, and was clad in a very rusty suit of tweeds. On the bench beside him lay a grey overcoat and a silk hat, which had for some time been moulting. His face declared the habit to which he was a victim, but it had nothing repulsive in its lineaments and expression. On the contrary, it was pleasing, amiable, and rather quaint. At this moment no one would have doubted his sobriety. With coat sleeve turned back so as to give free play to his right hand and wrist, revealing meanwhile a flannel shirt of singular colour, and with his collar unbuttoned (he wore no tie) to leave his throat at ease as he bent myopically over the paper, he was writing at express speed, evidently in the full rush of the ardour of composition. The veins of his forehead were dilated, and his chin pushed forward in a way that made one think of a racing horse. "Are you too busy to talk?" asked Biffen, going to his side. "I am! Upon my soul, I am!" exclaimed the other, looking up in alarm. "For the love of heaven, don't put me out! A quarter of an hour." "All right, I'll come up again." The friends went downstairs and turned over the papers. "Now let's try him again," said Biffen, when considerably more than the requested time had elapsed. They went up and found Mr. Sykes in an attitude of melancholy meditation. He had turned back his coat sleeve, had buttoned his collar, and was eyeing the slips of completed manuscript. Biffen presented his companion, and Mr. Sykes greeted the novelist with much geniality. "What do you think this is?" he exclaimed, pointing to his work. "The first instalment of my autobiography for the Shropshire Weekly Herald. Anonymous, of course, but strictly veracious, with the omission of sundry little personal failings which are nothing to the point. I call it Through the Wilds of Literary London. An old friend of mine edits the Herald, and I'm indebted to him for the suggestion." His voice was a trifle husky, but he spoke like a man of education. "Most people will take it for fiction. I wish I had inventive power enough to write fiction anything like it. I have published novels, Mr. Reardon, but my experience in that branch of literature was peculiar, as I may say it has been in most others to which I have applied myself. My first stories were written for The Young Lady's Favourite, and most remarkable productions they were, I promise you. That was 15 years ago, in the days of my versatility. I could throw off my supplemental novelette of 15,000 words without turning a hair, and immediately after it fall to, fresh as a daisy, on the Illustrated History of the United States, which I was then doing for Edward Coughlin. But presently I thought myself too good for The Favourite. In an evil day I began to write 3-volume novels, aiming at reputation. It wouldn't do. I persevered for 5 years and made about 5 failures. Then I went back to Bowring. Take me on again, old man, will you? Bowring was a man of few words. He said, "Blaze away, my boy." And I tried to, but it was no use. I had got out of the style. My writing was too literary by a long chalk. For a whole year I deliberately strove to write badly, but Bowring was so pained with the feebleness of my efforts that at last he sternly bade me avoid his sight. "What the devil," he roared one day, "do you mean by sending me stories about men and women? You ought to know better than that, a fellow of your experience." So I had to give it up, and there was an end of my career as a writer of fiction. He shook his head sadly. "Biffen," he continued, "when I first made his acquaintance, had an idea of writing for the working classes. And what do you think he was going to offer them? Stories about the working classes! Nay, never hang your head for it, old boy. It was excusable in the days of your youth. Why, Mr. Reardon, as no doubt you know well enough, nothing can induce working men or women to read stories that treat of their own world. They are the most consumed idealists in creation, especially the women. Again and again work girls have said to me, 'Oh, I don't like that book, it's nothing but real life.'" "It's the fault of women in general," remarked Reardon. "So it is, but it comes out with delicious naivete in the working classes. Now, educated people like to read of scenes that are familiar to them, though I grant you that the picture must be idealized if you're to appeal to more than 1 in 1,000. The working classes detest anything that tries to represent their daily life. It isn't because their life is too painful. No, no. It's downright snobbishness. Dickens goes down only with the best of them, and then solely because of his strength in farce and his melodrama." Presently the three went out together and had dinner at an à la mode beef shop. Mr. Sikes ate little, but took copious libations of porter at 2d. a pint. When the meal was over he grew taciturn. "Can you walk westwards?" Biffen asked. "I'm afraid not, afraid not. In fact, I have an appointment at 2, at Aldgate Station." They parted from him. "Now he'll go and soak till he's unconscious," said Biffen. "Poor fellow! Pity he ever earns anything at all. The workhouse would be better, I should think." "No, no, let a man drink himself to death rather. I have a horror of the workhouse. Remember the clock at Marylebone I used to tell you about? Unphilosophic. I don't think I should be unhappy in the workhouse. I should have a certain satisfaction in the thought that I had forced society to support me. And then the absolute freedom from care. Why, it's very much the same as being a man of independent fortune." It was about a week after this, midway in November, that there at length came to Manville Street a letter addressed in Amy's hand. It arrived at 3 one afternoon. Reardon heard the postman, but he had ceased to rush out on every such occasion, and today he was feeling ill. Lying upon his bed, he had just raised his head wearily when he became aware that someone was mounting to his room. He sprang up, his face and neck flushing. This time Amy began, "Dear Edwin." The sight of those words made his brain swim. "You must, of course, have heard," she wrote, "that my Uncle John has left me £10,000. It has not yet come into my possession, and I had decided that I would not write to you till that happened, but perhaps you may altogether misunderstand my silence. If this money had come to me when you were struggling so hard to earn a living for us, we should never have spoken the words and thought the thoughts which now make it so difficult for me to write to you. What I wish to say is that, although the property is legally my own, I quite recognize that you have a right to share in it. Since we have lived apart, you have sent me far more than you could really afford, believing it your duty to do so. Now that things are so different, I wish you, as well as myself, to benefit by the change. I said at our last meeting that I should be quite prepared to return to you if you took that position at Croydon. There is now no need for you to pursue a kind of work for which you are quite unfitted, and I repeat that I am willing to live with you as before. If you will tell me where you would like to make a new home, I shall gladly agree. I do not think you would care to leave London permanently, and certainly I should not. Please to let me hear from you as soon as possible. In writing like this I feel that I have done what you expressed a wish that I should do. I have asked you to put an end to our separation, and I trust that I have not asked in vain. Yours always, Amy Reardon. The letter fell from his hand. It was such a letter as he might have expected, but the beginning misled him, and as his agitation throbbed itself away, he suffered an encroachment of despair which made him for a time unable to move or even think. His reply, written by the dreary twilight which represented sunset, ran thus: "Dear Amy, I thank you for your letter, and I appreciate your motive in writing it. But if you feel that you have done what I expressed a wish that you should do, you must have strangely misunderstood me. The only one thing that I wished was that by some miracle your love for me might be revived. Can I persuade myself that this is the letter of a wife who desires to return to me because in her heart she loves me? If that is the truth, you have been most unfortunate in trying to express yourself. You have written because it seemed your duty to do so. But indeed, a sense of duty such as this is a mistaken one. You have no love for me, and where there is no love, there is no mutual obligation in marriage. Perhaps you think that regard for social conventions will necessitate your living with me again. But have more courage. Refuse to act falsehoods. Tell society it is base and brutal, and that you prefer to live an honest life. I cannot share your wealth, dear, but as you have no longer need of my help, as we are now quite independent of each other, I shall cease to send the money which hitherto I have considered yours. In this way I shall have enough, and more than enough, for my necessities, so that you will never have to trouble yourself with the thought that I am suffering privations. At Christmas I go to Croydon, and I will then write to you again. For we may at all events be friendly. My mind is relieved from ceaseless anxiety on your account. I know now that you are safe from that accursed poverty which is to blame for all our sufferings. You I do not blame, though I have sometimes done so. My own experience teaches me how kindness can be embittered by misfortune. Some great and noble sorrow may have the effect of drawing hearts together, but to struggle against destitution, to be crushed by care about shillings and sixpences, that must always degrade. No other reply than this is possible, so I beg you not to write in this way again. Let me know if you go to live elsewhere. I hope Willie is well, and that his growth is still a delight and happiness to you. Edwin Reardon. That one word, dear, occurring in the middle of the letter, gave him pause as he read the lines over. Should he not obliterate it, and even in such a way that Amy might see what he had done? His pen was dipped in the ink for that purpose, but after all he held his hand. Amy was still dear to him, say what he might, and if she noted the word, if she pondered over it. A street gas lamp prevented the room from becoming absolutely dark. When he had closed the envelope he lay down on his bed again and watched the flickering yellowness upon the ceiling. He ought to have some tea before going to the hospital, but he cared so little for it that the trouble of boiling water was too great. The flickering light grew fainter. He understood at length that this was caused by fog that had begun to descend. The fog was his enemy. It would be wise to purchase a respirator if this hideous weather continued, for sometimes his throat burned, and there was a rasping in his chest which gave disagreeable admonition. He fell asleep for half an hour, and on awaking he was feverish, as usual at this time of day. Well, it was time to go to his work. Ugh! That first mouthful of fog! End of chapter 27, part 2.